right. Well, hello and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Kickstarting Wealth Creation for Recent Graduates and Young Professionals, led by Charles Rotblut. And thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to have you all here. My name is Jenna Brashear, and I'll be your host for today. And a few things to go over before we begin. I do want to remind all of our webinar viewers that AAII is a nonprofit educational group and is not a financial advisor, and thus is not able to give personal advice. Every investor is different. That's why our goal with each broadcast and article is to educate you on how to make better financial decisions. And a handout of the presentation will be available under the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel, and that's located on the right-hand side of your screen. And additionally, a copy of the slides used during today's presentation will be sent to all who attended tomorrow afternoon. And if you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, please submit them using the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel. And once our presentation concludes, I will select a few questions for Charles to answer. And questions that are not selected for the broadcast will be reviewed and addressed afterwards. And of course, if you have any additional questions about membership or anything very specific, you can always email members@aaii.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if you experience any issues with the audio or the video of the webinar, please consult the instructions on how to change your device's settings or consult the GoToWebinar website for support at gotowebinar.com. And just a friendly reminder that this presentation is recorded and a replay of the webinar will be available tomorrow on AAII's YouTube channel, along with links to this presentation's handouts and any resources we discuss. The PDF and the link to the recording will be available at aaii.com/webinars. And for new viewers, we like to give a little background about our organization. The American Association of Individual Investors is an independent nonprofit corporation formed in 1978 for the purpose of assisting individuals in becoming effective managers of their own assets through programs of education, information, and research. And with that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Charles.
Thanks, Jenna. Just need to make sure I share my screen here. Is it popping up?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let's see this here. Sorry about we're having a little bit of computer issues this morning. I have a webcam that's not cooperating.
Always what happens.
Yes.
And just for the group, I will be putting stuff in the chat section as well. I sent a little good afternoon message. Hopefully everybody received that already. But I'll be putting links and references, anything else that is supplemental to Charles's presentation. So you can check out the chat during the presentation, so that with any kind of links or interesting resources and things like that.
You know what, Jen, I'm not seeing the option here to share a screen.
Let's see. How about?
Oh, there we go. There we go. Show my screen. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so everyone should be able to see it now, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Sorry for a little bit delay there, folks. We had a little bit of camera issues this morning too. I'm gonna try to remember to look down on my laptop. Unfortunately, my webcam, which works flawlessly with Microsoft Teams, the platform we're using for GoToWebinar, doesn't like my webcam, so I have to remember to look down at the small camera on my laptop. So if you see me kind of glancing up, that's why. But with all that said, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're actually gonna have today's webinar focus really on younger investors, or really just beginning investors, people who are either early in their career or perhaps just starting with investing. And I know starting with investing. And I realize some of you who are attending have a lot of experience of investors, but perhaps you have a son, you have a child or a grandchild, or perhaps a niece or a nephew, or you know someone who is starting to get involved in investing. I hope you use this webinar, some of the talking points from this webinar, to start our conversation with them. Share the slides with them. We'll have replays of this presentation posted as well. So even if some of the stuff we talk about now might be things that you're really familiar with, hopefully it'll give you some information that you can pass along. And certainly those of you who are attending that are newer to investing, or perhaps newer in your careers, hopefully you'll learn some valuable insights that will help you as an investor. And probably the best place to start is really with just the basics of financial planning. I'm trying to move my little window out of here so I can actually see what we're talking about. And so it really starts with, understand where your money's going. Obviously, when you get paid, you're getting a paycheck. Some of that money you realize is going to rent or perhaps a mortgage. Some of it's going to insurance. But overall, the key to finance, regardless of where you are in your investing journey, is just to know where your money is going, how much is mandatory spending for, say, shelter, food, expenses, and obviously if you have debt, determining how much you owe and what your payments are. But then you also want to think about funding your savings account, setting up, if you're starting a job for the first time, save a 401k or similar type of account. We'll get to that. Opening a brokerage account, but also create a plan. What do you want to do with your money? It's not so much what you want to invest for, but think about, well, why are you investing for? So maybe your goal is, I want to save for retirement. Well, why do you want to save for retirement? Why does that matter? Well, obviously you don't want to have to eat cat food in retirement, but perhaps you have you have certain vision of what retirement means to you. Think about that. Or perhaps, a short-term goal, you want to buy a new car, you want to buy a new house. Perhaps you're thinking about getting married down the line and you want to have a really nice honeymoon. So if you can visualize why money's important to you and what you want to do with that money, it really helps you be more committed to your goals and helps you actually be a more committed investor, because you have this goal that you can actually visualize and you know why money's important to you. Now, I do realize part of your goal might be to just have a lot of money, in which case you can kind of view it as, I want to have enough money to tell the rest of the world to go take a walk, to have the freedom to do what I want to do when I want to do it. So try and envision why, if that's the reason why you want to have money, try and envision what that looks like. What does that type of financial freedom mean to you? And there's no goal that's right or wrong. Your goals are your goals, it's personal, but the more you can try and visualize what those goals are, put the why associated with those goals down in writing, the more disciplined you will be about investing, because you have something tangible and visual that you're saving for. And finally, this actually comes up with a conversation. I had a conversation I had earlier today. We're at the doctor's office, and one of the technicians asked me what I did. I told him, and his question was, well, you must look at the market quite often. And I looked at him, I said, actually, we always tell people to look at the market less often. And I told him, the fewer decisions you make as an investor, the higher returns will be. And I think one of the big lessons when you start out in investing, one of the key lessons in regards to investing that you need to learn when you first start out is learning to do less and really disengage with the stock market as much as you can. Because the less frequently you look at your portfolio, the less frequently you look at what the market's doing, the less you'll notice the volatility of the markets, and the greater ability will be to stick with a long-term plan. So even though there's constant drumbeat about what's going on in the markets and this need to trade, this need to do stuff, the reality is a lot of behavioral finance, a lot of research into successful investors shows that if you disengage from the market and you actually do less, you end up with higher returns. So you want to get to a point where you're making fewer decisions, but they're smarter and better decisions. And that key advice is something you can use throughout your investing journey, and it applies no matter if you're an experienced investor or you're starting out and you're about to make your first investment. Now, one of the keys to when you start investing is simply to have a budget, to figure out, where's my money going, how much am I spending is non-discretionary, meaning it's mandatory. And again, that comes down to things like food, shelter, health insurance, things like that. But then think about what of your spending is discretionary. Going out to eat, Netflix, Spotify, vacation spending, gift giving. The list of discretionary spending is long, and it's up to you to figure out where's your money going. What do you really want to spend your money on? And for some people, having that Netflix subscription, having that Spotify subscription makes your lives a lot more enjoyable. That's fine if that's the case, but you want to strike the balance between I'm spending my money on things that really matter to me, and that balance of needing to save. And you want to make sure that you are making saving part of your budget. Now, you'll see on the right side, we list different budget apps. We covered these previously in the AI journal. There are various apps you can use to take control of your spending. Obviously, the old method of just having a sheet of paper and writing down where your money's going and doing a budget like that works as well. Or perhaps you use your smartphone and you use a notepad app. It really doesn't matter how you track your spending, as long as you're tracking in a way where you can identify this is where my money's going, and you have the ability once in a while to sit back, look at your spending, and ask yourself, am I spending my money in a way that aligns with my goals, and am I spending my money on things that make me happy? Two big questions, and you obviously want to ask after those, and am I leaving enough aside to pay myself later, to basically set money aside for your future self? And believe me, your self that's 20, 30 years out in the future will be really happy that you thought of that person now and that you are setting aside money. But the other thing, and I'll get back to this, is the more you can save when you're at younger ages, the less you have to save when you're at older ages. Because particularly if in your 20s, your 30s, one of your greatest assets, one of your greatest advantages is time. And the ability to set aside money for 30, 40 years is a tremendous advantage, because you'll have so much opportunity to benefit from the long-term gains in the market, to benefit from compounded returns that comes from investing in stocks. Because a dollar invested today is going to be worth far more than a dollar 30, 40 years from now. And so the extent you can take advantage of time now, the more you'll benefit from later on. Think about it as a snowball. It's very small when it's rolling down the top of that mountain, but by the time it actually gets to the valley, it's extremely massive. And you want your portfolio to start off as that small snowball, trying to build that snowball as much as you can with what you're able to save now, but then give it the time to kind of roll down that hill and really gain mass to it's really something massive by the time you hit retirement. The other thing, obviously, and we're sticking here with Finance 101 because I think it's very important to have that cornerstone when you start investing, is just develop good credit habits, making sure you pay your bills on time, making sure that if you do have debt, you're paying more than a minimum amount, paying what you can. And obviously, if you're starting out and perhaps you have student debt, perhaps you have other debt, it's obviously tough to strike that balance between saving and paying down debt, but you do want to do both. You want to make sure you're taking advantage of time with your savings. If you have access to an employer-sponsored plan like a 401k, making sure you're saving enough to get that match, but also making sure you're managing your debt. If you have debt, pay it down. If you don't have debt, great. Make sure you pay bills on time all the time. What I personally find helpful is I pay my bills every week, including my credit cards. I'm someone who uses reward paying credit cards. I'm always making, I like cashback cards. I use the Citigroup has a double cash card. It pays 2% on purchases. But there's other credit cards depending on categories that pay more. I think they're a great tool because you're getting money back or points back on stuff you would do anyway. But I pay bills every week, so I make sure that I'm never late. Now, you don't necessarily have to pay your bills every week, but you want to make sure you're staying on top of them. And obviously avoiding late payments, because if you avoid late payments, you avoid fees, and you build up your credit score. And a higher credit score helps you out as an investor, because when you do have to take a loan out, say for a new car or perhaps a mortgage, you're going to get a lower interest rate. That lower interest rate frees up discretionary money, which you can then put back into the markets for investing into savings. So even though it's Finance 101, there's a direct tie between having a good credit score and being able to build wealth through investing. You want to use every advantage available to you that you can as an investor. And one of the advantages you have to yourself is being disciplined in terms of how you manage your credit and having that very high credit score. Now, going back to investing, when you first start out, there's some key accounts you want to set up. One If your employer offers an employer-sponsored plan, these are known in the industry as defined contribution plans, meaning that you're the one who's actually depositing the money into the account. You want to set up, it can be a 401, it might be a 407. If you're working for a nonprofit like AAII, you might have a 403B. If you're working for the federal government, you'll have a thrift savings plan, a TSP. Whatever that plan is, you want to save to it, particularly if there's a match involved. And there's two advantages to using that account. One is automatic deferrals, meaning that your savings go into the account right from your paycheck. So you don't have that pinch of coming out of your bank account. Before it even hits your bank account, those savings go automatically into the account. The second thing is there's often an employer match, and we'll get to those in a second. But in very simple terms, that's free money for just saving. So you want to take advantage of it. But it's also really important to set up a high yield savings account. And so we're talking about investing, but a high yield savings account plays into that, because when you think about your money that you're setting aside, some of it you might need over the short term. Perhaps an emergency pops up, perhaps a year from now, a close friend's getting married and they're in a different state. Or perhaps you're thinking about moving down, thinking about down payment, paying a security deposit on an apartment, you'll need a new car. Those short-term expenses, you don't want to risk that money in the market, because you don't want a downturn in the market to occur at the exact time you need that money. This is money that you want to invest in a way to preserve capital. That's why you want to look at a savings account. And you particularly want to have a high yield savings account so you maximize the interest you earn on that account. But if you have the ability to do so, it's also good to open a brokerage account, including an IRA or Roth IRA. A taxable brokerage account will allow you to build, say, intermediate term wealth, money that you might spend, say, in 10, 15 years, but you're willing to put at some risk. In a traditional brokerage account, you can withdraw that money at will with no penalty. With an IRA or Roth IRA, if you withdraw that money before age 59 and a half, you will be assessed a 10% penalty on top of the taxes being withdrawn, the top of the taxes being assessed from that money. So within the case of an IRA, the Roth IRA, there's no taxes on a withdrawal, but you still pay that 10% penalty. I should correct myself here. With a Roth IRA, you will never pay taxes on the withdrawals on the money you contributed, but you will pay taxes on the earnings in that Roth IRA if you withdraw before age 59 and a half. So money you think you might need to withdraw before you reach 59 and a half, you won't have in a taxable brokerage account. The IRAs is for money you need in retirement. And if you have the ability to do both, it's good to have both, to have that diversification in your accounts, because obviously your spending needs will vary over time and it gives you the most flexibility. Now, as far as where you should open a brokerage account, you can really use the brokerage of your choice. It really comes down to personal preference. Are there differences, say, between a Fidelity, a Schwab, an E-Trade? Yes, but really they're not substantial. Now, there's also obviously app-based brokers, places like Public, Robinhood. There's several others. Those are options too. What I will say with Robinhood, realize that Robinhood's model is based on how much you trade. And although I realize a lot of Gen Zers like Robinhood, the app's really simple to use. You can look at a more traditional brokerage from like Fidelity, where you can open an account with $5, $10. They have an app. You can buy fractional shares, meaning you can invest, say, $20 into a stock versus trying to buy a full share. All the advantages you have with Robinhood, but you don't have a brokerage whose sole business model is set up on hoping you trade as much as possible so they can profit from those trades. So as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of Robinhood, but outside of that, really find the brokerage with the app or the website you feel comfortable using, and make sure you contribute to that regularly. Set up automatic deposits so the money automatically comes from your savings account into that brokerage account. Now let's talk about 401k plans here. Well, it might be, again, it might be a 403B, it might be a 457, it might be a TSP, depending on who your employer is. The nice thing about employer-sponsored retirement plans is that they often use automatic enrollment. This basically means that you're automatically signed up for the plan, and then it's up to you to voluntarily opt out. If your plan does not automatically enroll, go down to the HR office, sign up today. The other thing you have to realize, there's a few terms you have to realize that are associated with these types of accounts. One is they'll actually use auto enrollment, they'll use auto allocation, they'll use auto escalation. So what are these? Well, auto enrollment, as I said, they automatically opt you into the plan. The auto escalation means that they will actually increase how much you contribute, what percentage of your pay you contribute with each pay period. They'll automatically increase that, typically every calendar year, but they might tie it to when you get a raise. Auto allocation means they'll pick an allocation for you, typically a target date fund tied to your age. And I'll explain target date funds in a minute. So those are key things. But the big thing about your retirement plan is there's often is a match. So if you save X percent of your pay, your employer will match it by Y percent. And again, this is free money. So even if you're a plan that doesn't have the greatest investment options, and perhaps there's fees attached to it that aren't so great, you're still getting free money. And the nice thing about this employer match is you set up your account, you put money in there. That money is going to grow from just growth in the investments you hold in your portfolio. But then your employer is going to kick in more money, and that money is going to grow from growth in investments as well. So all of a sudden you have two sources funding your savings, and they both grow. And as long as your employer long enough to meet the vesting period, and the vesting period is basically how long you have to be at your job to be able to claim all the matching contributions. Once you reach that vesting period, the money you saved, the money your employer kicked in, and all that growth in assets, that's all your money that you get to keep and invest further and grow further. So these are really good plans. And the other reason why I love employer-sponsored plans is the money comes out of your paycheck. And a lot of the accounts tend to be traditional IRAs, which means the money comes out pre-tax. So when you invest $1 into a pre-tax account, it really isn't a full dollar coming out of your paycheck. It's really $1 less your tax rate. So just make it simple. Say you're in a 24% tax bracket. You contribute $1, you actually only have 76 cents coming out of your take-home pay. So you're not actually losing a whole dollar spending power, but you're saving a full dollar. Now, if there is a Roth option and you're young, there is an argument to be made for those, because with a Roth IRA, you're paying them, with a Roth 401k, you're paying the taxes up front for the contribution, meaning your take-home pay is a little bit lower, but you'll never pay taxes again. So if you're in a lower tax bracket and you think, later on I'll be making all this money, I want to be in a higher tax bracket, you basically get to lock in the taxes now and you're done for the rest of your life. Now, how much can you contribute? So the limit is $22,500 for someone who's age 49 or younger. Now, people who tend to be early in their careers, that's a pretty high hurdle to meet. But if you're in a high-paying job, it's certainly something, and you have the ability to make that contribution, by all means do it. But obviously, if you can't make that and that goal just seems way too large, that's fine. Save what you can. You're always better off saving a little bit now than not saving anything at all. So how much should you save? Well, the rule of thumb is to save 15% of your pay, including any employer match. The reality is, save as much as you possibly can. And if you're fortunate enough to hit those limits in terms of the 22,000, look for other opportunities to save as well. But if that 15% of your pay just seems really high, that's okay. Just set an initial goal of what you can save. Now, I will point out that most plans, where they automatically opt you into the plan, the default saving rate tends to be 3%. If you're saving 3% of your pay, you're not going to be able to fund retirement. You're never going to get to that point. So you want to make sure if there's a default savings rate of 3%, you always want to make sure you save more. And really just try to save as much as you can. If you start off and all you can really do is 3%, that's fine. Next, when 2024 comes around, maybe you get up to 3.5% or 3.75%. Whatever it is, no matter how small that increase is, every year seek to increase that savings rates. Small changes add up over time. And obviously, if you go from 3 to 5% or say 5 to 7% or 8%, even better. Increase your savings as much as you think you can. And obviously that number varies by each person. But again, realize, going back to what I said before, the earlier you start, the less you will need to save later on. Every year you delay saving for retirement, you have to save exponentially more. And it's not as if, oh, I can just up my savings rate by 1% next year and I'll make up for it. Time doesn't work that way because compounded returns grow exponentially, meaning that, if you earn 10% on a dollar right now, next year you have $1.10. Well, the year after that, you'll have $1.21, and et cetera. It keeps growing because you're earning that 10% each year on the amount you originally saved, but then you're earning 10% on the earnings you got. And each year those earnings keep growing by 10%, assuming obviously a very flat 10% rate of return, which we know is not reality, but you get the example that over time, your earnings on what you saved are going to be larger than what you've actually contributed in savings because of time. And so you really want to take advantage of that snowball effect where you start off at the top of the mountain, a very small snowball, you rolled it down the snowy mountain, and by the time it gets to the bottom of that slope, it's very massive. So again, I can't stress this enough. Start early and save what you can and keep increasing that savings rate as much as you can. So let's talk about target date funds. A lot of 401k plans and 403b plans use this as a default option. A target date fund basically sets a date at which a person's going to retire in the future. So on the screen, they're showing for people who are planning on retiring in 2050. There's plans right now for 2060. There might be some plans being introduced for 2070. I don't think quite yet, but we should probably be seeing those coming out. So what a target date plan does, it tries to adjust its allocation over time. So as you can see in the screen, most of these funds are mostly allocated to stocks, around 90% to stocks. Because they're assuming the investor's young, in this case still has about 30 years until retirement, so they're trying to grow wealth. As we get closer and closer to retirement, those funds get more and more conservative. So the goal is, as you get closer to retirement, your goals switch from trying to grow wealth more towards trying to preserve wealth. And how those funds change and how those allocations change over time vary by fund. But the idea is the funds are generally designed to get you to retirement and then for a certain period after retirement, gradually getting more and more conservative. And as a default option, they work pretty well. But I kind of describe them as an off the rack suit. You go to Macy's, you go to Nordstrom's, and you get a suit for yourself, or maybe or some other outfit for yourself. It might fit all right, but it might need a little bit of tailoring here and there to kind of look a little bit better. But it's never quite going to fit the same as if you bought a custom-made shirt, a suit, or maybe you got some other custom-made type of clothing. It's never going to fit as well. And it's the same thing with target date funds. They're never going to work as well as a customized allocation, but they do a pretty good job for what they're designed to do. So if your goal is, I want to make things easy, I don't want to think about allocation, target date funds can work. But they work better if you're willing to actually tailor them. And so in this case, perhaps in this, because they tend on the stock side, they tend to be oriented towards large cap funds. Perhaps you add a small cap value fund, so you're tilting your allocation towards a category of stocks that have been shown to have very high long-term returns. Perhaps you set up your own allocation. You look at a target date fund, okay, I get an idea what they're doing, but I'm going to see what else is in my portfolio. I'm going to pick up my own large cap fund. I'm going to pick up my own international stock fund, my own small cap fund. So you can build your own portfolio yourself and opt out of the target date fund. The nice thing is you have this default option, which your goal then becomes to beat the target date fund, not necessarily to just avoid it. So again, these are good default options, and they do a good job of what they're defined to do, but they're a broad solution for a lot of people and not a customized solution. And there are ways to build it better. And in fact, if you just take a target date fund and you just add a small cap value fund to it and perhaps a large cap value fund to it, and that's all you do, and perhaps your target date fund's 50% of your portfolio, your large cap value fund's 25%, and your small cap value fund's 25%, you have a portfolio that's tilted a little more towards value, and you'll set yourself for higher returns. Paul Merriman of the Merriman Foundation is a very big advocate for this idea of taking a target date fund and just adding a little to it to tilt your portfolio towards stock categories that can grow your wealth a little bit more. So realize you always have the ability to customize. Now, if you're looking at funds in your plan and you're trying to figure out how do I choose them, well, we actually have a tool on our website, AAII.com, called our Fund Compare tool. And here's an example of it. I just picked 4 Vanguard funds, pretty much at random. They're all large cap funds. But what this does, it allows you to take 2 funds or more funds side by side and see how they compare. It helps you decide which fund's better than the other. So what you can see on the screen here, we're showing the returns, we're showing the category risk, we're showing the total risk, and you're seeing grades. These grades are basically how the fund compares to its category peers. And these grades are just like you saw in schools. A and B's are good. D's and F will get you grounded. And so you want to look at returns over several periods to see what's more consistent. The category risk index tells you, is this fund more volatile than its peers? And so when you get to grades of, say, D or F, means it's a lot more volatile. If its grades are A or B, it means it's less volatile. And then the total risk index, in this case, tells you, well, how volatile is this fund relative to all other funds? And if you have high returns and high risk, what that tells you is, yes, this fund's capable of giving me high returns, but it's also going to take me on a roller coaster ride with big swings in its returns. And you'll have to decide whether or not you're comfortable. Now, when you're looking at returns, you might be asking yourself, okay, well, what period do I look at? In general, the longer the period you can look at, it's better. So it's better to pay attention to 5-year returns than 3-year returns. I would say look at the 5 and 10-year returns, but I would also look at the individual returns for each of the last 5 years, so you get a sense for what kind of variance has a fund experienced. Are its 5 years returns high because it had one really good year and 4 so-so years, or has it consistently done really well? So on this tool, if you click on any of the ticker symbols, it will take you to our fund evaluator page where you can actually see how these funds have performed on a year-by-year basis. What this tool does is allow you to actually do side-by-side comparison. So if you're looking at your 401k menu, you're seeing all these funds and you see a few that look interesting, but you're trying to decide between one or the other. This tool can give you a quick snapshot to help you make that decision about which fund may I potentially want to invest in. Now, we've been talking about 401ks, but let's talk about IRAs and Roth IRAs. So a big difference between a 401k and an IRA and a Roth IRA is that a 401ks run through your employer. It does have a higher contribution limit, but it also restricts you on what you can invest in to the plan menu. An IRA, what you pay with pre-tax dollars, meaning you can actually get a deduction on your taxes if you use a traditional IRA, or a Roth IRA, which you pay with after-tax dollars, which means, again, you pay taxes now, so there's no deduction when you file your taxes. You get your take-home pay, which is after tax, so you've paid taxes on your paycheck, you put the money in, but then you never pay taxes again. With a traditional IRA, you get a tax break when you file your taxes, but then when you start withdrawing after age 59 and a half, you will owe taxes then. So you're just delaying taxes. Neither is tax-free. It's just a question, are you paying taxes now or later? The nice thing about IRAs and Roth IRAs is that you have pretty much really open reign on what you want to invest in. You can invest in individual stocks. You can invest in ETFs. You can invest in bonds. If you want to invest in mutual funds, you still can do that. So IRAs give you a lot more flexibility, but they do have a lower contribution limit. The limit is $6,500 if you're age 49 or younger. So that's all. Also, with a 401k, there are some protections against creditors because it's covered under a particular portion of the law where Roth IRA, traditional IRAs are not. But the IRA does give you free reign, and you can always roll over your 401k to an IRA. So one advantage of setting an IRA now, even if you're putting a small amount into it, is that later on, if you switch jobs and you want to actually get your 401k and put it into an IRA, you already have that account set up to make the process easier of rolling over. And now you can actually have a 401k and you can have an IRA. You can have both. You're not limited. As I said, IRAs give you more advantages in terms of what you can invest in. 401ks, you do get that automatic paycheck deduction from it. You also get the employer match. But what you could do with an IRA, if you want to set one up, is you can set up automatic contributions. Most brokers will allow you to go on there and say, hey, make a contribution of X amount every 2 weeks or every month. And you can specify the date to get set up with the time you get paid, which is what I do. So when I get my paycheck automatically to my wife's IRA, money on a day I get paid, money comes out of my paycheck right to my wife's Roth IRA. So before I even see the money in my bank account and actually go through and actually, go through my paycheck stub, pay my bills, that money's automatically out of my paycheck, automatically saved into the Roth IRA. And I'm a big fan of automatic contributions, whether it's to savings, whether it's to 401k, whether it's to an IRA. The more you can automate your savings and take that decision away from yourself in advance as to whether or not you're going to save, make that decision one time. So every paycheck, you're not making that decision. Do I want to put this money in my savings account or do I want to spend it? You've taken that away from you. It's called a Ulysses contract. So you're making a decision in advance to save. Now, keep in mind, just because that money, say, goes into your emergency savings account or your high yield savings account or your brokerage account, doesn't mean you can't turn around and take it back out, but you have created a mental hurdle for yourself. And because you set the mental hurdle, because you move the money out of your checking account, you know it's an account that you've mentally set aside as savings, you're going to be less tempted to pull away from it. And because you've made that decision in advance to save the money, you're going to save because you get paid. Your high yield savings account, financial institution, or perhaps your broker looks at your account and says, oh, I'm supposed to take money out of the account right now, I'll do it. That process is done for you. So when you sit down and look, how much is my checking account, all of a sudden it's what's left after you've saved. And it sounds very simple, but it's extremely powerful and it will make you a more disciplined investor. And I'm very much for taking actions in advance where you only have to set it up once and you don't have to make the decision again. It really makes you more disciplined. There's a whole lot of behavioral science showing this is highly effective. So we've been talking about 401k plans. We've been talking about IRAs, but let's talk about mutual funds and ETFs. Because obviously I said in a 401k, you're most likely going to have just mutual fund offered, but in a brokerage account, you have access to ETFs. So both of them are pooled investment vehicles. What does this mean? In both cases, investors are pulling their money in, all putting it into a single pot and having a professional manager manage the money. Now, there are some slight differences. With a mutual fund, when you buy shares in a mutual fund, the money's going right from your pocket into the mutual fund. With an ETF, you're actually buying ETFs from other investors. So ETFs trade on the open market, and you can buy and sell them throughout the day. So when you buy an ETF, you might be buying it from me, you might be buying it from Jenna, you might be buying it from somebody else. But based on the demand, the trade demand for those ETFs, middlemen will actually go in, notice authorized participants, or APs if you want to sound like someone who's in the know. They'll look at the demand, the trading activity in ETFs, and then they'll work with the ETF to bring money in and out of the ETF. So at the end of the day, it's still pulled money, but it's a little different mechanism. And the big thing you have to realize, though, with ETFs is they trade during the trading day. Mutual funds trade at the end of the day. So because ETFs can be bought and sold during market hours, there can be more temptation to trade them. You might also have slight differences between the price of the ETF and the underlying value of the assets that make up the ETF. So say the ETF is trading at $100. The underlying value of those assets might be close. They might be $100.01. Or there might be some premier discount to maybe the ETF's priced at $100, but the assets are worth $101, or they might be worth $99. So there can be a little bit of a discrepancy going on there. Usually, if you're sticking with a pretty big ETF following a well-known index, sorry about that, you're not going to have this problem. But if you go with more esoteric ETFs, perhaps it's a niche ETF, you may actually see this premium or discount for it. And we're pretty much in favor of sticking with the ETFs that are larger, that are following well-known indexes, say a Russell 2000, SP 500, those types of broad indexes. Now, ETFs in general tend to have lower expense ratios. It's not always the case, so don't assume just because it's an ETF, it has a low expense ratio. An expense ratio is basically how much the fund company charges to run the fund. Some mutual funds can actually be competitive with ETFs, particularly the Vanguard mutual funds. Now, the one advantage is to having mutual funds, if you're investing smaller amounts, is that typically with mutual funds, you can actually buy in fractional amounts. So what that means, say a share of the mutual funds has a value of $100. You can buy in $4 increments. You can buy it in $63 increments. You can buy it in $121 increments. You don't have to buy it at the price of the share. ETFs generally trade at their share price. So their share price is $100. You typically need $100 to buy that ETF. Now, there are some brokers that do allow what's known as fractional trading. Fractional trading means you can buy ETFs or stocks in dollar amount instead of share price amount. So for instance, Fidelity does this. I know this because I use Fidelity and I do it myself. So if you have $50 in ETFs trading at say $80, you could say, okay, I want to buy $50 as ETF, and you'll get that percentage amount of your ETF in there. So you won't be buying a full share, you'll be a partial share of the ETF. So some brokers allow it. It varies, and you want to check with the brokers if that matters. But generally, most ETFs are quoted as a price, and they're actually sold in full shares. With mutual funds, tend to be easier to buy in fractional amounts. Now, we do have an ETF guide. We also have mutual fund guides. So if you're looking at ETFs, you have a brokerage account, there's about 2,400 ETFs. If you're looking at that going, I have no idea which ETF to pick, we have an ETF guide where you can actually sort by category. You can do comparisons. If you notice there's little check boxes here on the left side, you can actually say, I want to compare this ETF and that ETF to do a comparison of those ETFs. Now, for those of you who are AAII members who have seen our ETF guide online before, you might notice this interface looks a little different. We're in the process right now of actually revising the interface for our ETF guide. We are also finalizing, for those of you who are A+ investor or platinum subscribers, our ETF and mutual fund screening tool. So this is actually going to be the interface for it. Completely streamlined, more of a tabular format. It loads quicker. It's easier to actually get to the information you want to know about a particular fund. So this is a preview. It's not on our site yet, but it is coming soon. So, but like I said, if you're looking at ETFs, if you click on one of those boxes on the side, it'll call, you can actually, again, do the same comparison on ETFs as you're doing with mutual funds, as I showed earlier. Now, the other thing is, if you want to compare mutual funds and ETFs, you can do this, you can do it on either the ETF or the mutual fund comparison tool. Just put a mutual fund ticker in with an ETF ticker, and you can do a side-by-side comparison of both. So if a mutual fund is similar to ETF, and you're trying to decide which ones, you certainly can do that on a comparison tool as well. Now, the other thing is, as I said earlier, it's important to open a high yield savings account as well. And the idea behind the savings accounts is to set aside at least 3 to 6 months of expenses. And savings accounts really help investors because if you have this short-term pool of cash, when a big expense comes up, again, maybe it's repairing your car, maybe you need to get a new computer, maybe you're looking to make a down payment on your house. You can tap the savings without having to raid the money you've set aside for long-term investing. Sorry, I actually moved my computer screen there. So if you set the money aside in savings, you'll have that emergency cash, so you'll have it for a period of time. You set aside that money in short-term savings, so you have this emergency stash you can tap as needed while allowing your investments to grow for a long period of time. I do strongly suggest that you try to look online for high yield savings accounts. Don't go with your local bank. Typically, the interest that your local bank pays is not going to be very much. As you can see here, we have an affinity program with Discover Bank where they actually give AAII members a higher interest rate than people can normally get through Discover. There's certainly other online banks as well, but there's no reason to settle for the interest rates that national banks are paying, or particularly the brick and mortar banks, when you can look online and get a much higher savings rate. As you can see here, it's also not a bad time to lock in a CD. As you can see, a pretty juicy rate there on 4.8%, as you're seeing here on the Discover page as well. And you can see the link there, AAI.com. Sorry, AAI.discoverbank.com. You can go there, see the interest rates, and obviously there are other interest rates, but the idea is maximize the interest you're getting on the savings accounts. But again, have that savings account to protect your long-term money that you're trying to invest for decades to come. After you've all done this, the other big thing is, and perhaps even beforehand, is to create a wealth building plan. So early in this presentation, I just talked about thinking about why is money important to you? What goals you're trying to achieve? What do you want to do with your money? That's basically the whole idea behind the PRISM Wealth Building Plan. Aligning your investing decisions with your goals. And the PRISM Plan is a 5-step process, but it's really simple to understand it. First of all, what are you looking to do with your money? What are you trying to save for? What is that goal? When is that goal going to occur? How much do you think you need? Just jot it down on a sheet of paper. I want to retire in 40 years. It's going to cost me X amount, and I'm doing it because I want to spend my retirement on the beach and be able to surf every day as I please. Maybe your goal is different, and that's fine. It's one example. Then think about your risk tolerance. And in very simple terms, if the market were to experience another bear market and drop, say, 20, 30%, would you be phased? Would that cause you to get nervous? Would that cause you to pull you out of the stock market? If yes, then you need to think about being a little more conservative. If no, you can be more aggressive. Think about your allocation. If you need the money over the short term, say within 5 years, your goal really needs to be focused on preserving capital, which means investing very conservatively. If your goal is long term, say more than 10 years, you want to grow capital, which means you want a high exposure to equities. Now, if you're somewhere in intermediate term, say 5 to 10 years or 5 to 15 years, then you need a more of a moderate allocation where you look at perhaps some stocks for growth, but perhaps some bonds and some short-term savings to preserve capital. So a little bit of a mix. Then it comes down to, are there certain types of investments you prefer? Do you want to use stocks? Do you want to use mutual funds? Do you want to use ETFs? Jot it down, say, I'm going to look at this type of investment, because when you do, you suddenly put blinders on. You're not looking at every investment under the sun. You know what? I'm a long-term investor. I'm willing to take risk. I like to invest in ETFs, and I'm only going to look at equity ETFs because you've done all this narrowing down. You know what your risk tolerance is, you know what your goal is, and you know what your preference is. And then finally, create some basic rules. What's going to cause you to sell the investment? What traits do you want in investment? For a fund, low expense ratio, has good returns relative to its peers, follows a broad index perhaps. And your sell rules might be if the objective ever changes, if it no longer stops being the cheapest option, that could be your sell rule. If you're looking at stocks, I want stocks with strong earnings growth. I want the valuation to be reasonable. And I want to be fundamentally strong. And maybe you're using the A+ grades where you want a growth, quality grade, both of say A or B. And then your sell rules are just the opposite of it. The grades start falling to a D or F. And finally, the last thing is really just monitoring. Monitoring your portfolio, say once a year to make sure your allocations are on track, taking a look at your life. Maybe something in your life's changed. Maybe you've gotten married. Maybe you have kids. Maybe you moved into a house. You want to pay attention to these big life goals to see if something in your life's changed that's going to alter your goals. But you also again want to check your allocation, make sure your allocation's still on track and that your allocation's right for where you're at in your life. It's as simple as that. And the nice thing about this is you can pull a sheet of paper, you can use the Notes app on your phone, whatever, you can write it down. It does not have to be complicated. And in fact, here's an example of a PRISM plan we wrote for a person who's age 35. You can see here, it's just plainly bullet pointed what they need to do, what their allocation needs to be. You can see this whole thing in AAII Journal, but literally this plan, in our PRISM Academy, we'll walk you through the detailed steps and we'll walk you through every step you need to do and really give you a strong understanding of what's involved in a PRISM plan, how it works for you. And it's really helpful to go through that. But if you just want to start, say, hey, I've got 20 minutes, I just need to get started. Go through this. You can literally do a PRISM plan in under half an hour and just jot down very simple things. And then you can always go back to our PRISM Academy to learn how to hone it and improve upon it. But a simple plan that's written is always much, much better than no plan at all. And even having just a bullet point plan will make you a better investor, will help you achieve your goals. And finally, I want to leave you with some tips about just how to be a successful investor. There's some just basic things that work really well. One is constantly, consistently savings. Again, I mentioned before about setting up automatic contributions to your 401k, to your savings account. If you're a brokerage account, doing that. Automate it. Make the decision one time to save and just let it go. And then once a year, just simply remind yourself, you can pull out your phone. Use Siri, for instance, here on an iPhone and just say, hey, Siri, remind me in 1 year to up my savings. I'm sorry, I see Siri about ready to do that. Simple as that, and just do it once a year. Make that decision to save and have those savings come out of your paycheck right when you get paid. So you're not having every period to make the decision about whether or not you do save. It's automated. Develop a well-defined approach and stick to it. That's a lesson that came from our founder, James Clunan. Have clear rules governing your investing decisions. Have clear rules governing how you're going to save. The advice I gave to someone earlier today, limit the number of decisions you make. The fewer decisions you make as an investor, chances are the better the decisions are going to be over the long term. One of the biggest mistakes people make in investing is being too active. And one of the big advantages you have as an individual investor is being able to sit tight and not make changes. No one's going to fire you as their portfolio manager because you are your portfolio manager. Versus the professionals, they're judged on 3-year performance. So they're constantly having to turn over the portfolio. They're constantly having to make decisions. And it's to their detriment. Use the fact that you don't have to report your returns. Use it to your advantage because you have the ability to follow long-term strategies that are going to work out incredibly well over the long term, and the ability to ride out the shorter term bouts of volatility. I'm also a big believer in checklists. I think checklists work across a variety of fields. But finally, if I were asked to give one bit of advice, it comes from a very famous book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's simply don't panic. The ability to keep your head calm and the ability perhaps to even be greedy when everyone else is fearful will serve you extremely well as an investor. The people who are not fazed by bear markets tend to be the people who reap the highest returns out of everyone. So if you can learn not to be reactive to the markets, not to be too greedy when the market's flying, and not to be too fearful when the market's plunging, if you can learn to be more just calm, steady state emotions, it will help you as an investor, and it will make you a better investor, and it will lead you to having higher returns. And finally, as I said before, if you had a family member, if you're watching yourself, you're an experienced investor, but you have a family member who's perhaps younger or perhaps is early in their investing journey, please share this webinar with them. As Jenna said, we'll make slides available soon afterwards. We'll also, in the coming days, post this to YouTube. Please share this with them, and hopefully they can benefit from that. But also at the same time, I'll encourage you, consider whether or not they might benefit from a membership to AAII. We also have a lot in there. We are going to restart our beginning investor column in the journal later this year. We've had a lot of requests for content geared towards people who are earlier in their investing journey. So we're going to have that coming in the journal in the coming months. So, obviously, certainly, please invite them to do so. I know, Jenna, I know we have some promos for gift memberships as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Charles. So basically, we just wanted to highlight, like Charles says, we're trying to customize a lot of content and everything for the beginner investor. We also, so in just talking about different kinds of memberships that we have our basic regular membership. Basically, that includes everything as far as the monthly AAII journal. You get access to the shadow stock model portfolio, the Prism Academy that Charles spoke a lot about. That also includes the Prism process, and then also the online academy that has all of our videos that we put together, all of our worksheets, very interactive. There's discussion questions and prompts that that will guide you through the process as well. And then access to our online community where we have groups that you can connect with other AAII members and other investors across the nation. It's great for a younger person who is wants to connect with other investors, wants to get some insight or maybe perspective from a more seasoned investors. It's great to pose questions every week and things like that. And then of course our annual guides, taxes, mutual funds, and ETFs guides that kind of guide you through every process and everything. So we have basic membership, which starts at it's at $49 a year, and then we also have our lifetime. This is a great gift if you want to give it to someone who's younger, who's going to use it for years and years on end as markets fluctuate, as there's different cycles. And that's at $290, and basically you get everything basic membership does, but for life. And then we also have our platinum, which is more specific. It goes into you get basic membership, and then every premium newsletter, which includes A+ Investor, which is our robust tools, growth investing, which is our newest service, and then dividend investing, DMQ stocks, and stock superstars reports. You kind of get the whole premium bundle, so that as markets fluctuate, you can also try out different strategies, see what works for yourself, get more information from specific strategies or specific analysts, and it's really, so there's a lot of different options and things like that.
Absolutely. And Jenna, were there any questions at all that I can answer?
Let me, there's actually a lot of really great questions. Let me take a look real quick. Okay, well, actually, the first one is a little bit general, and you've kind of touched on it a lot in different aspects of your presentation. But if your grandchild just got their first job after college, what would be a few important things that you would recommend they do immediately within the first few months to get off on the right foot for retirement investing?
Certainly. So, assuming that they have a job, I would sign up for their 401k if they're not automatically opted in. I would certainly go do that. Have them go to HR. But I would also, I would do that. I think the other thing too, if they just graduated, obviously, understand what their student loan is, how much debt they have, and start having a plan to pay that down. I know for a lot, it's certainly a lot more expensive than when I went to college now. But the other thing, I would just encourage them to start developing, good spending habits and start thinking about what their short-term goals are. So certainly if they're just graduated, they might be thinking about perhaps moving out on their own. They might be thinking about housing, think about those types of stuff. And I think, obviously if they're young, they want to go out, they want to go out with their friends. Just getting the habit of creating a budget. If they're not sure how much to budget, start budgeting themselves. And, it might just be a case where when they go out the next night, just stop and think, okay, how much did I spend? How did I spend last night? How much did I spend this weekend on friends? And, where can I cut back but still engage in stuff? I think those types of things are really helpful. And again, I think the biggest thing is for them just to get a habit of setting up those automatic deposits, either contributions right to a 401k plan, setting up a savings account. I think those things are really helpful. And I think with their student loans, if they're able to automate the payments, perhaps they can come out of their paycheck. One thing I will say though about debt payments, if they owe X amount per month, perhaps they can pay it twice a month, pay it with every paycheck. That's one little thing with that. It helps at least eases the pain of that huge payment. And if they're financially in a position where they're able to pay a little bit more, that certainly helps with the interest payment as well.
That's really good advice. And I think, so one of the questions we got also was, it's kind of two different things, but there are things where, there's a concept of catch-up contributions and things like that. But is there ever an age that is too late to start investing for retirement?
There's not. There really isn't. We actually have an article in a journal. We can probably find and put it into the notes where I've actually looked at what happens if you start from scratch at age 50. And you do need to contribute to your 401k to really get that growth. But even age 50, you can actually accumulate $1 million if the markets have close to historical average returns and you're disciplined. So it is very possible, even at later ages, to actually save quite a large amount. But the big key is, as I said earlier, the later you start, the more you have to save. The one nice thing is about the Secure Act is they did pass a provision in there. So if you're a high income earner between the ages of 60 and 63, you're going to be able to contribute at least $10,000 in catch-up contributions to our 401k. Now, it'll actually be a little bit more than 10,000. We'll talk about it in a July journal because of the inflation adjustment to it. Even now, it's not quite 10,000, even though the law says 10,000. But I will point out, there is a slight problem with the way the Secure Act that was passed last December. If you read the law closely, it actually ends catch-up contributions for 401ks altogether. There's some weird language the way they wrote it. You'll see it in the journal. They're going to fix that, but there will be a case starting, I believe, 2024. I'm going off memory here, where you actually will have a larger catch-up contribution for those 4 years of age 60 to 63. So if you're starting late and you haven't hit those ages yet, you will have that later on. But obviously, you will need to have a salary high enough to be able to afford those larger catch-up contributions, because that, with the regular contribution, is going to be a very large sum in terms of absolute dollars.
Interesting. And I kind of segmented the questions out. So I think in regards to when you were talking about high yield in savings accounts, somebody asked, you mentioned high yield savings rates. Are CDs or money market accounts also good investments for people right out of college? And then kind of on a segment of that, where do you start when trying to figure out what a competitive rate of return should be on these high yield savings accounts?
Yeah, so I guess two parts to that. Money market accounts were great. Certainly, I think, with money market accounts, if you're going through, depending where you're going through, obviously, if you're going through your broker, they're not going to be FDI insured, but they're pretty conservatively managed, so you'll be fine. CDs work well too if someone's willing to set aside money, lock up their money for a period of time. There's usually some penalty to withdraw your money early, so you want to make sure you understand what that penalty is. Usually it's 1 to 2 quarters of interest, but they certainly can work well. Obviously, publish the rates for Discover. If you want to look at other places, bankrate.com is a really good source to look at for competitive interest rates. I will say make sure you specify your state because some of the interest rates offered on there, I've noticed personally, are not offered in the state you live in, so you want to be aware of that. But it's a pretty good place, I would say, to look at is bankrate.com and see what they have, and make sure you pay attention to any terms, any caveats associated with opening those accounts at different banks. Discover, I have an account with Discover. It's very easy to work with, but there's certainly other banks and certainly other banks and other institutions offering competitive rates. But make sure that if the bank, it's FDIC insured. If you're going with a credit union, I always get the initials messed up. I believe it's NCUA. Make sure that's backed up as well. But if you're looking at a brokerage account, make sure that's actually insured by the SIPC.
And we got a couple questions all on the idea of compounding. And it's saying that it's key to growth, and basically the question being like, how does compounding apply when buying a stock or a mutual fund? And then how does that similarly, or how does it differ from like DRIP plans, like dividend reinvestment plans? And which ones are there times where one's better than the other, or how does that exactly work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if a stock's paying dividends, then you can have the ability to just reinvest it yourself. Some companies do offer DRIP plans where you actually go through the company, but a lot of brokers now will just reinvest the dividends for yourselves. So that's one way of actually growing your wealth right there, is by having the dividends reinvested. If you're buying and hold a stock and it doesn't pay dividends, obviously you get the return of that stock, but that stock will grow over time. And so realize, if the stock grows from say $100 to $200, it's 10% return. Or say the stock grows 10%, goes from 100 to 110. If that stock increases 10% again, all of a sudden, instead of your stock appreciating by $10, it'll appreciate by $11, same percentage gain over time. So you get that way. With the mutual funds, it's the same type of thing where it's basically the realizing capital gains, reinvesting those capital gains, plus the investments you have over time just appreciating in price. So use Berkshire Hathaway as a perfect example, a stock I personally own. Its compounded returns are massive, but Berkshire's never paid a dividend. But over time, because the share price has risen and because it's benefit from growth just in the market itself, the percentage gain actually might stay the same on it. Well, it might have an annualized gain, but each year the annualized gains off of a higher and higher dollar amount. So it's basically the larger your dollar amount, the more in absolute dollars the investment is going to increase for every percent of return. So that's the idea how compounding works. In terms of what's better than the other, there really isn't necessarily an advantage to an individual stock versus a mutual fund versus a dividend when it comes to compounding. It really comes down to diversification in case of a mutual fund, but really more importantly comes down to what you're investing in, what types of stocks you're investing in, how the mutual fund's being managed, are they following a disciplined process, and in the case of mutual funds, are they keeping expenses low? And that's a big key with mutual funds, is you want to get the expense ratio really low, because that's the one deterrent to compounding. If there's a high expense ratio, you're always going to have that drag on returns from that high expense ratio. So getting that expense ratio as low as possible to increase your compounded returns.
And as far as we had a couple questions about Roth IRAs, as far as when it comes to withdrawal penalties for either types of IRAs, are there any circumstances where an early withdrawal could be beneficial or necessary, especially for someone who is a young professional?
As much as possible, you want to try not withdrawing from it, just simply to let that compounded returns, using time on your side. When you withdraw and you're young, you're losing that time component. There are some small caveats where you can actually withdraw from an IRA and certain exceptions. I can't cite them off the top of my head. I think education expenses is one of them. There is going to be in the Secure Act allowed some withdraw some emergency withdrawals as well in very limited circumstances. There's a few other small, very specific caveats. I can't tell you off the top of my head. There are listed on the IRS's website, but I think to the extent that if you can all avoid withdrawing, particularly when you're young, try to do so, because time is such a valuable, really tailwind in your favor. You don't want to do anything to disrupt it if you absolutely can.
That makes sense. And another question was specifically on rollover Roth IRAs. I know we were talking about, regular traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, but is there a reason why you should keep like a Roth IRA and a rollover Roth IRA separate, or is there any value to having both types of accounts?
There really isn't a need to keep them separate. You certainly can roll it over. The only scenario where I would say you might want to keep it separate is a scenario where perhaps you might expect a very large tax event to happen in a certain year. So perhaps, you're expecting perhaps there's a trust that's going to be liquidated, for instance, or you have stock options perhaps, and you think that they might actually become vested in a certain year, and all of a sudden you're going to have this big surge in income because say you work for a start tech firm, and you're going to suddenly have this big increase in income that's going to make you ineligible to deduct the IRA. In a specialized situation like that, you might want to keep it separate, but just to keep the accounting clean. In that scenario, in which case you'd want to open an IRA for that specific year. But barring that scenario where you had a specific reason not to complicate your tax picture, there really isn't a reason to keep your IRA separate from your rollover IRA. You can certainly just combine them.
Makes sense. And let's see. As far as, let me check out the other questions coming in. I appreciate everybody's questions. They've been fantastic lately. Let's see. Oh, in our example on Prism, somebody mentioned that we talk about different examples of how much we think, or how much someone should plan on having as a safety net for everything you said, like dispensable income, emergencies, all that stuff. So how did we come up with a 1.5 to 2 million? Is there something that that basically people can use to understand how much they're going to need it, or is there more of is every year increasing, and has that number changed as, like, for our example, over the years because of inflation or other things as well?
Yeah, that's pretty much just a rough estimate. I actually used some retirement calculators to come up with it, and it's just really an example number we plugged in. It's really going to vary by person. And I would encourage you to try and use a few different retirement calculators. When we looked at them, and we covered them, I believe it was last year in the AAII journal, we got different values, even though we were trying to plug in similar circumstances, a similar hypothetical couple for what they would need. We got very different values. But once you retire, when you think about how much you're going to need, it really comes down to Social Security, how much you and your spouse might get Social Security, if there's any pension benefits, if there's wealth outside your retirement savings that might cover for it, housing, in a scenario where you assume your house is going to be paid off, or perhaps you might downsize. So there's a lot of different variables that actually goes into how much you're going to need for retirement, and that doesn't even get to lifestyle. Whether you're looking at a pretty simple lifestyle, whether your lifestyle, say, involves a lot of golf, a lot of travel, all those things come into play. So there isn't a set number that you need for retirement. But if you want a rule of thumb, it basically is the rule of 25 times what you think you might need your spending. So you could look at what you're spending right now, think about, okay, and make a guess at how much you might need in retirement. Say, based on right now, I think I'll need 80,000 a year to spend, whatever the number is. You can multiply it by about 25, and that could be your approximate goal for how much you need to save for retirement. Now, it definitely, it's just a rule of thumb. It varies. I think the best thing is to just use a couple of retirement calculators. Go online, find a few retirement calculators, put in some numbers, and just get a rough ballpark. I think at the end of the day, you're always better off trying to oversave for retirement than under to save. And obviously you want to balance that so you're not saving so much that you're sacrificing say, enjoying, the Grand Canyon when you're young, or, being able to go to, say, Taylor Swift was just in town here in Chicago. So if you're a Swiftie, you want to see Taylor Swift, to miss that chance because you're so focused on future year, you still want to make sure you allow for those types of things to happen, but you're always better off oversaving than undersaving. Because if you do oversave and you get to retirement, you realize I have more than I need. That gives you a lot of flexibility to perhaps do other things in retirement. Maybe take some of those trips. Maybe you want to give back. It does give you that flexibility. So given the choice between undersaving and oversaving, I'd always opt for oversaving because it's always a much better position to be in.
I agree. And I did want to share, we actually had a member who was watching. They just wanted to share something with us, which I thought was fantastic. They said, thank you so much for the session, that he got his son involved in investments when he was a teenager, and he was able to use AAI's tools to help the education process for him. And basically, he said that he's going to review this deck with him to refresh his plan, as well as his goals, since his needs and priorities have probably changed over the last couple of years. And he wants to see how did he adjust, or has he in the past, and drive some good conversation. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Paul.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I just want to see. I think that's about it. Like I said, if there are more questions that come up later on, feel free to message us at members@aai.com, or you can always you can give us a call, or you can contact us on community as well. We're very active on AI community, so you can always send in your questions that way, and we'll be able to address them when you do. And Charles, is there anything, last comments before we wrap up?
No, I would just, obviously, as I said, if you're just starting out now, just, at the very least, just set those automatic contributions and write a plan. And obviously, as I said early on, if you have a child, a grandchild, a nephew, a niece that's just starting out, please share this with them. And hopefully we gave you some great talking points that you can use to start up a very productive conversation with them.
Agreed. And yeah, I want to thank Charles again for guiding us through his strategies on effective saving and investing for retirement in a postgraduate atmosphere. I know a lot of people are, feel lost, or they feel that they need some guidance, especially when they just graduated or they're just becoming a young professional. So this is a great, like Charles says, a great resource to share with them. And yeah, ask as many questions as possible. We're here to help all the way. And like I said, again, if you have questions for Charles regarding his presentation, or about how to give the gift of life membership or any of our other subscriptions, feel free to email us at members@AAII.com. And we talked a lot about the Prism Academy today. So if you haven't delved into the Prism process yet, or want to, you can visit AAII.com/learn-and-plan. I'll put all the resources and all the links that we discussed into the chat, or we'll send them via email tomorrow. And all AAII members have access to the Prism process and online academy as part of your membership benefits. And also, if you're interested, we mentioned it briefly, but if you want to connect with other AAII members across the nation, we do have a robust online community group that allows AAII members to interact with one another in a discussion style forum. We have communities focused on retirement planning, withdrawals, income investing, mutual funds, and ETFs, stock screening, and so much more. So, and we keep adding different groups all the time. We just opened a technical analysis one. We have an options investing strategies. So the topics are really about, there's any kind of topic that you're looking for, we have it. And you can visit community.aai.com, and then you use your AAI login credentials to access that site. And we've included a direct link to the community in the post-webinar email all attendees will receive tomorrow afternoon. And if you like today's presentation, you can always visit aai.com/webinars to see all of our archived presentations, things that we've had in the past, and then as well as see what's next. And to mention it again, this presentation is recorded, and a replay of the webinar will be available tomorrow on AAI's YouTube channel, along with links to this presentation's handouts and any resources we discussed today. With that, we wish all of you viewing good health, good fortune, and a great rest of your day. Thank you, and take care.